Don't eat that, sir. It's poisoned. Monique Jackson's voice sliced through the opulent kitchen of the Thompson Estate in Atlanta, Georgia. Sunlight gleamed off granite counters, casting a deceptive glow over the scene. Monique, a 30-year-old black maid, stood frozen, her sharp eyes locked on Brooklyn, Richard Thompson's wife, stirring a pot of pumpkin soup. With a smug smile, Brooklyn slipped a vial of white powder from her apron, sprinkling it into the soup and stirring swiftly, her cold gaze calculating. Hidden behind the pantry, Monique's heart pounded. She knew this wasn't spice, it was poison. Brooklyn's smirk, sharp as a blade, confirmed Monique's fears about Richard's mysterious decline. Fear and suspense surged. Monique had glimpsed a murderous plot. Would she stop it in time? Could truth prevail against deceit? The kitchen of the Thompson Estate in Atlanta, Georgia, still pulsed with the echo of Monique Jackson's cry, "Don't eat that, sir, it's poisoned!" The words reverberating like a struck bell. The granite counters gleamed under the summer sun, but the air was thick with suspicion, the scent of pumpkin soup now a sinister undertone. Monique, 30, stood rooted to the spot, her apron damp from the tray of iced water she'd nearly dropped, her brown eyes burning with the image of Brooklyn's smug smile as she sprinkled white powder into Richard Thompson's soup. That moment, just minutes ago, had transformed the kitchen from a place of routine to a stage for betrayal, and Monique's heart pounded with the weight of what she'd seen. The dining hall where she now stood was a cathedral of wealth, mahogany tables stretching long beneath crystal chandeliers, the grandfather clock in the corner ticking like a heartbeat. Richard, 45, sat at the head, his navy suit loose on a frame that had withered over weeks. His once vibrant eyes, the kind that lit up boardrooms in Atlanta's elite gatherings, were dulled by fatigue, his hands trembling as he set down the shattered remnants of the soup bowl. Brooklyn, 38, stood opposite, her silk dress catching the light, her blonde hair framing a face that flickered between panic and defiance. The fizzing puddle on the marble floor was evidence enough, but the room hummed with doubt. Monique's voice had shattered the calm, and now all eyes were on her. She'd served the Thompsons for 5 years, her presence as unremarkable as the polished silver she cleaned. But she noticed everything. Richard's morning jogs through Buckhead's shaded streets, now abandoned. His laughter, once echoing through the halls, now silenced. His hospital visits, 3 in a month, with no answers. Brooklyn's sudden interest in cooking had coincided with his decline, her manicured hands stirring pots with a care that felt too calculated. Monique had suspected something was wrong, but suspicion wasn't proof, until she'd seen that vial, that powder, that smile. Richard's voice cut through the silence, sharp and strained. "Monique, you'd better have a damn good explanation for this." His gaze was a storm, torn between trust in his wife and the accusation hanging in the air. Monique stepped forward, her locket, a gift from Richard's first wife, pressing against her chest, grounding her. "I saw her, Mr. Thompson, in the kitchen, not 10 minutes ago. She took a vial from her apron, poured white powder into your soup, and stirred it with a smile like she'd won something. I've watched you fade since she started cooking. Dizzy spells, shaking hands, ER trips. It's not a chance, sir. It's poison." Brooklyn laughed, a brittle sound that splintered the tension. "This is ridiculous, Richard. A maid accusing me. She's lost her mind." Her blue eyes flashed, but her hands betrayed her, clutching the table's edge. "She's overworked, imagining things. You know how emotional these people can get." The jab stung, but Monique held her ground, her voice steady. "I'm not imagining the powder, Mrs. Thompson, or the way you looked when you thought no one was watching. I heard you last night, too, on the phone in the East Wing, saying, 'He's fading, darling.' Who were you talking to?" The room gasped, the staff exchanging glances. Richard's face darkened, his eyes locking on Brooklyn. "What phone call?" he demanded, his voice low, dangerous. Brooklyn's smile faltered, her composure cracking like thin ice. "She's lying, darling," she said, her tone too sweet. "She's jealous, territorial. She's been cold to me since I arrived. You've seen it." Monique's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. "I've served this house 5 years, sir. I know your routines, your strength. You were running miles a month ago. Now you can't climb the stairs without stopping. Test that soup, And you'll see I'm not the one lying. Richard's gaze shifted to the fizzing puddle, then back to Brooklyn. Marcus, he barked, summoning the head butler, a wiry man with graying hair who appeared instantly. Seal that mess for testing. No one touches it until we know what's in it. He turned to Brooklyn, his voice cold as steel. If Monique's wrong, she's out. But if she's right, Brooklyn's lips twitched, her eyes darting to the spilled soup. Of course, darling, she said, her voice a velvet mask. Let's put this nonsense to bed. She turned to the staff, her smile regal but strained. Monique's been under stress. She's confused, seeing things that aren't there. But Monique saw the fear in Brooklyn's eyes, a flicker of the same panic she'd glimpsed when the bowl hit the floor. The locket burned against her skin, a reminder of her promise to Richard's first wife. Don't let anyone hurt him. She kept that vow through years of quiet service, through nights of wiping tears from a dying woman's face. Now it drove her to stand against a storm of doubt. The dining hall fell silent, the grandfather clocks ticking louder than ever, each chime a pulse in the tense air. Marcus knelt, carefully collecting the spilled soup into a sterile container, his movements deliberate. The other staff, maids, footmen, cooks, watched with bated breath, some whispering, others avoiding Monique's gaze. She felt their judgment, the weight of being the one who dared to speak. Brooklyn stepped closer to Richard, her hand brushing his arm. You don't believe her, do you? She murmured, her voice soft, intimate. She's just a maid, Richard. She doesn't belong in our world. Richard pulled his arm away, his eyes fixed on the floor. I believe in proof, he said quietly, and we'll have it soon enough. Monique's heart raced, but she stood tall, her apron a badge of her resolve. She'd thrown herself into the fire, accusing the lady of the house in front of everyone. There was no retreat now. Brooklyn's gaze followed her, sharp and venomous, promising a reckoning. The staff's whispers grew louder. Some called her brave, others a troublemaker. But Monique didn't care about their words. She cared about Richard, about the truth, about the vow she'd made. As Marcus sealed the container and left to arrange the testing, Monique felt the weight of her locket again. The dining hall with its chandeliers and polished silver felt like a battlefield now, and she was a lone soldier. She'd seen death stirred into a bowl of soup, and she'd stopped it, for now. But the fight was just beginning, and Brooklyn's eyes told her it would be brutal. The grandfather clock struck, its chimes echoing through the silence. Monique clutched her locket, her resolve hardening. She'd spoken the truth, and no matter what came next, doubt, danger, or retribution, she wouldn't back down. Richard's life depended on it, and so did her honor. The dining hall's tension lingered like smoke, the grandfather clock's chimes still echoing in Monique Jackson's ears as she stood in the shadowed corridor outside, her locket a cold weight against her chest. Her cry, "Don't eat that, sir, it's poisoned," had shattered the Thompson Estate's polished facade, and now the air crackled with the aftermath. The fizzing puddle of pumpkin soup, sealed away by Marcus for testing, was a silent accuser. But Monique's heart pounded with a deeper fear. She'd thrown herself into a storm, and Brooklyn's venomous glare promised it would rage. Her accusation had turned every eye in the room, staff, Richard, even the chandeliers, against her. And the weight of their doubt pressed harder than ever. Monique's fingers tightened around her locket, the gift from Richard's first wife, its engraved initials a reminder of her vow to protect him. She'd seen Brooklyn's smug smile in the kitchen, the white powder dissolving into the soup, and heard her whispered phone call last night. He's fading, darling. Those moments burned in her mind, each a piece of a puzzle she couldn't ignore. Richard, once a titan who jogged through Buckhead's oak-lined streets, was now a ghost of himself, his hands trembling, his eyes hollow. Monique had served him for 5 years, unnoticed but vigilant, and she'd watched his decline with growing dread. The hospital visits, the doctor's shrugs, the sudden shift when Brooklyn took over his meals, it all pointed to poison, but proof was a fragile thing, and she just staked her life on it. She moved to the East Wing, her steps soft on the marble floor, the estate's grandeur a mocking contrast to her racing thoughts. The corridor was dim, lined with portraits of stern Thompson ancestors, their eyes seeming to judge her. She paused at the door to the study, where Richard had retreated after the dining hall chaos. She needed to explain, to make him see, but fear gnawed at her. What if he didn't believe her? What if Brooklyn's charm, her silken lies, won him over? Monique's chest tightened. She was a maid, invisible to the elite, her word pitted against a woman who wielded beauty like a weapon. Inside the study, Richard sat at his oak desk, a glass of bourbon untouched before him. His face was gaunt, the lines deeper than they'd been a month ago. He looked up as Monique entered, his eyes a storm of anger and betrayal. "You've got one chance to explain," he said, his voice low, raw. "You accused my wife of trying to kill me. You'd better have more than a hunch." Monique's throat tightened, but she met his gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It's not a hunch, Mr. Thompson. I saw her in the kitchen, pouring powder from a vial into your soup." She smiled like it was a game she'd already won. "I've watched you fade, your strength, your laugh, gone since she started cooking. 3 ER trips, no answers. And last night, I heard her on the phone in the East Wing saying, 'He's fading, darling. Just a little longer.' She's not caring for you, she's killing you." Richard's jaw clenched, his fingers gripping the desk. "You're talking about my wife, Monique, the woman I married. You're saying she's a murderer?" His voice cracked, the pain of doubt cutting through his anger. He wanted to believe in Brooklyn, in the love he'd clung to after his first wife's death. But the fizzing soup on the dining hall floor haunted him. Monique stepped closer, her locket glinting in the dim light. "I promised your first wife I'd look after you. She was my friend, sir, and she loved you. I can't break that promise. I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. There's someone else. She's planning with them. Test the soup, and you'll know I'm not lying." Richard's eyes softened at the mention of his first wife, but the weight of betrayal pressed harder. He stood unsteady and turned to the window, staring out at Atlanta's skyline. "I built this empire with my own hands," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought Brooklyn was my second chance. If you're wrong, Monique, you've torn my world apart for nothing." "I'm not wrong," she said, her voice firm but trembling with the stakes. "I've got no reason to lie. I'm just a maid, but I see everything. The way she watches you, the way she moves money. I found an empty vial in the kitchen trash, unmarked, clinical. It's not sugar, sir. It's death." Richard turned, his face a mask of conflict. "Money?" he asked, his voice sharp. "What do you mean moves money?" Monique hesitated, then pulled her notebook from her apron, its pages filled with hurried scrawls. "I've heard her on calls late at night, talking about accounts, transfers. 2 nights ago, she said, 'When he's gone, it's all ours.' I don't know who she's working with, but it's not just about you. It's about your fortune." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of R&B drifting from the staff quarters, a reminder of the world beyond these walls. Richard's hands shook as he took the notebook, flipping through Monique's meticulous notes. Each entry was a dagger, times, phrases, the chilling progression of his own decline. He sank back into his chair, the bourbon glass trembling in his grip. "If this is true," he said, his voice breaking, "I've been blind. But if you're lying—" "I'm not," Monique said, her eyes fierce with conviction. "I've got nothing to gain, sir. I'm risking everything. My job, my name, but I can't watch you die." A knock at the door broke the tension. Marcus entered, his face grim, holding a sealed container with a soup sample. "It's ready for the lab, sir," he said. "Dr. Carter's team will rush it. We'll know by tonight." Richard nodded, his gaze distant. "Good, and pull Brooklyn's phone records. I want to know who she's been talking to." He looked at Monique, his voice softer now, tinged with something like gratitude. "Stay close, Monique. If you're right, I'll need you. If you're wrong, you'll answer for it." Monique nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. As she left the study, the corridor felt colder, the portrait's eyes sharper. She slipped into the kitchen, her hands trembling as she resumed cleaning, the memory of Brooklyn's smile a constant shadow. She found the trash can where she'd seen the empty vial, but it was gone, emptied or taken. Her stomach twisted. Brooklyn was clever, and Monique was playing a dangerous game. She paused by the radio, the R&B tune a fleeting comfort. She'd heard Brooklyn's voice again in her mind. He's fading, darling. Whoever darling was, they were part of this, and Monique needed to know more. She slipped her notebook back into her apron, its weight a reminder of her resolve. The estate was a battlefield now, and she was alone, armed only with the truth. But truth was a fragile weapon, and Brooklyn's venom was far from spent. As she moved to the pantry, a faint creak echoed from the hall. She froze, her breath catching. Was it Brooklyn, watching, or someone else, someone tied to those phone calls? The locket burned against her chest, and Monique whispered to herself, "I won't let you down." The fight for Richard's life had begun, and she'd face it, no matter the cost. The creak in the corridor still echoed in Monique Jackson's ears as she stood in the pantry, her hands trembling around the rag she clutched. The Thompson Estate's opulence felt like a cage now, its marble floors and gilded frames mocking her racing heart. The memory of Brooklyn's venomous glare in the dining hall, the fizzing soup shattered on the floor, and Richard's storm-dark eyes weighed on her like a physical burden. She'd accused the lady of the house of poisoning her husband, and the truth, fragile as it was, had set a fire that threatened to consume her. Her locket, the last tether to Richard's first wife, burned against her chest, its vow to protect him a lifeline in the chaos. Monique's cry, "Don't eat that, sir, it's poisoned," had turned every whisper in the estate against her, and now she stood alone, her courage a flickering flame in a gathering storm. She forced herself to move, wiping down shelves to steady her nerves, but her mind churned with fear and resolve. The empty vial she'd seen in the kitchen trash was gone, likely taken by Brooklyn or someone loyal to her. That absence gnawed at Monique, a silent warning that her enemy was cunning, always a step ahead. Richard's order to test the soup and pull Brooklyn's phone records had given her hope, but his doubt, etched in his trembling hands and guarded eyes, cut deeper than any insult. He wanted to believe in his wife, in the love that had filled the void after his first wife's death. But Monique's accusation had cracked that illusion. She felt the weight of his trust, fragile as glass, and the fear that she might lose it. In the study, Richard Thompson sat slumped at his desk, the bourbon glass still untouched, its amber glow catching the firelight. His face was a map of betrayal, each line carved by the possibility that Monique was right. He'd built an empire in Atlanta's tech world, faced down rivals and crises, but nothing had prepared him for this, a wife who might be his executioner. The memory of the fizzing soup haunted him, a grotesque confirmation of Monique's words. Yet Brooklyn's voice, soft and pleading in their private moments, tugged at his heart. He gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, torn between love and suspicion. Monique's notebook, its pages filled with her meticulous scrawls of Brooklyn's late-night calls, lay open before him. "He's fading, darling," she'd written. The words were a knife, twisting deeper with every reread. Monique knocked softly and entered, her apron crisp despite the chaos. Richard looked up, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You're still here," he said, his voice a mix of relief and strain. "I thought you might have run after that scene." "I don't run, sir," Monique replied, her voice steady but laced with fear. "I made a promise to your first wife, and I'm keeping it. But I need you to trust me, or we're both lost." Richard's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering to the notebook. "You're asking me to believe my wife is a killer," he said, his voice breaking. "Do you know what that does to me? I loved her, Monique. I thought she loved me." Monique's heart ached at his pain, but she stepped closer, her eyes fierce with conviction. "I know it hurts, sir. But love doesn't put powder in your food. I saw her in the kitchen, smiling like she'd won a game. I heard her on the phone, planning with someone. She's not just betraying you, she's stealing your life." Richard stood, unsteady, and paced to the window, Atlanta's skyline a distant blur. "I've been blind," he whispered, his voice raw. 3 hospital visits, no answers. I thought it was stress, age. But if you're right," he turned, his eyes glistening, "if you're right, I've let her destroy me." "You're still here," Monique said softly, her own fear mingling with her resolve. "That means we can stop her. But you have to believe me, not her. A sharp knock interrupted them. Marcus, the head butler, entered, his face grim. "Sir, the lab's preliminary results are in," he said, handing Richard a sealed envelope. "Dr. Carter's team found traces of arsenic in the soup. It's slow-acting, lethal over time." Richard's breath caught, his hands trembling as he tore open the envelope. The words on the page were a death sentence. Not for him, but for his trust in Brooklyn. "Arsenic," he muttered, his voice hollow. "She's been poisoning me." Monique's stomach twisted, relief warring with dread. The truth was out, but it came at a cost. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to be right." Richard sank into his chair, the envelope crumpling in his fist. "I need to see her," he said, his voice a mix of rage and sorrow. "I need to hear it from her." Monique's heart raced. "Be careful, sir. She's desperate now. She knows I saw her, and that vial's gone from the trash. She's covering her tracks." Richard nodded, his eyes distant. "I've hired a private investigator to dig into her phone records. We'll find out who she's been talking to. But until then, Monique, stay sharp. If she's doing this, she won't stop at soup." Monique left the study, her legs heavy, the corridor's shadows darker now. She passed a maid, Clara, who avoided her gaze, her whisper joining others in the staff quarters. "She's trouble, stirring up lies." Monique's chest tightened, the sting of isolation sharp. She'd always been invisible, but now she was a target. The R&B tune drifting from the staff kitchen offered fleeting comfort, a reminder of Atlanta's pulse, but it couldn't drown out the fear. Brooklyn wasn't alone. She had someone, a darling, on the other end of those calls, and they were dangerous. She slipped into the East Wing, where Brooklyn's calls had echoed the night before. The hallway was silent, but Monique's senses were on edge. She checked the phone nook, finding nothing but dust. Then a faint rustle behind her made her freeze. She turned, but the hall was empty, the portrait's eyes watching. Her locket felt heavier, its promise a burden now. She'd expose Brooklyn, but at what cost? The truth was her weapon, but it was double-edged, cutting her as much as it protected Richard. Back in the study, Richard stared at the crumpled lab report, his heart a battlefield. He'd loved Brooklyn's laugh, her touch, the way she'd filled the void after his first wife's death. Now every memory felt tainted, poisoned like the soup. He thought of Monique, her fierce eyes, her steady voice. She'd risked everything, her job, her safety, for him. Guilt gnawed at him. He doubted her, let Brooklyn's charm blind him. He whispered to the empty room, "I won't be blind again." Monique in the kitchen gripped her locket, her resolve hardening. The estate was no longer a home, it was a war zone, and she was its lone soldier. Brooklyn's smile, the missing vial, the rustle in the hall, they were warnings. Someone was watching, waiting, but Monique wouldn't falter. She'd made a promise, and she'd keep it, no matter how many shadows closed in. The rustle in the East Wing corridor still haunted Monique Jackson as she stood in the Thompson Estate's kitchen, her fingers clutching the locket that anchored her resolve. The lab's confirmation of arsenic in Richard Thompson's soup had turned her accusation into a blade, cutting through the estate's polished veneer. Yet the weight of that truth pressed against her chest, heavier than ever. Brooklyn's venomous cry, "This isn't over, Monique," rang in her ears, a promise of retribution that made every shadow in the mansion feel alive. The grandfather clock's relentless ticking echoed from the dining hall, each chime a reminder that time was no ally. Monique's heart pounded with a cocktail of fear and determination. She'd saved Richard for now, but the war was far from won, and the cost of her courage was isolation. She moved silently, scrubbing the already spotless counters, her eyes darting to the doorway. The missing vial from the trash gnawed at her, a silent taunt from Brooklyn. The staff's whispers, Clara's cold avoidance, the others' sidelong glances, cut deeper than she'd admit. She was no longer just the invisible maid. She was the woman who dared to accuse the lady of the house, and that made her a pariah. Her locket, etched with the initials of Richard's first wife, felt like a talisman, its promise to protect him now a burden she carried alone. She'd heard Brooklyn's voice on the phone, plotting with her darling, and the lab report had confirmed her worst fears. But fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when Richard's life hung in the balance. In the study, Richard sat hunched over his desk, the crumpled lab report a testament to his shattered world. The bourbon glass remained untouched, its amber glow mocking his trembling hands. Arsenic. The word burned in his mind, poisoning every memory of Brooklyn's smile, her touch, the love he'd thought was his salvation. He'd built a tech empire in Atlanta, faced down boardroom battles, but nothing had prepared him for this betrayal. His heart ached with the weight of his blindness. He'd ignored the signs, his dizziness, his weakness, the hospital visits, because he'd wanted to believe in her. Now Monique's fierce eyes and steady voice haunted him, a reminder of the truth he'd almost lost. Guilt clawed at him. He doubted her, let Brooklyn's charm cloud his judgment. He stood, his legs unsteady, and paced to the window, Atlanta's skyline a blur through his glistening eyes. "I let her in," he whispered, his voice raw. "I let her destroy me." The notebook Monique had given him lay open, its pages a litany of Brooklyn's treachery, late-night calls, whispers of, "when he's gone." He thought of his first wife, her gentle laugh, her trust in Monique. He'd failed her memory, and it nearly cost him everything. Monique knocked softly, her apron crisp despite the chaos. Richard turned, his face a storm of pain and resolve. "You were right," he said, his voice breaking. "Arsenic. She's been killing me." Monique's heart twisted, relief warring with sorrow. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't want to be right, but you're alive, and that's what matters." Richard sank into his chair, his hands shaking. "I need to see her," he said, his voice a mix of rage and heartbreak. "I need to hear her explain this." Monique's stomach nodded. "She's dangerous, sir. She knows I saw her, and that vial's gone. She's already moving pieces, covering her tracks." Richard nodded, his eyes hardening. "My investigator's pulling her phone records now. We'll find her accomplice. But I need to face her, Monique. I need to know why." Before Monique could respond, Marcus burst in, his face pale. "Sir, the investigator's here. He's got something." A man in a gray suit followed, his briefcase heavy with secrets. He set it down, pulling out a folder. "Brooklyn's been calling a number registered to Vincent Cole," he said, his voice clipped. "A real estate mogul with a shady past. Multiple calls, late at night, encrypted. And there's more. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, millions moved in the last month." Richard's breath caught, his face ashen. "Vincent Cole," he muttered, the name a bitter pill. "She's been planning this with him." Monique's heart raced, the pieces clicking into place. She'd heard Brooklyn's voice, that darling on the phone. Vincent was the shadow behind her, the one promising a fortune bathed in Richard's blood. "She's not just after your life," Monique said, her voice trembling with urgency. "She's after everything you've built." Richard's eyes met hers, a flicker of gratitude cutting through his pain. "You saw this when I didn't," he said, his voice low. "I owe you more than I can say." Monique shook her head, her locket glinting in the firelight. "You don't owe me, sir. I promised your first wife I'd keep you safe. That's all I'm doing." The investigator cleared his throat. "There's enough here to bring to the police. The arsenic, the calls, the transfers. It's a solid case. But Brooklyn's clever. She'll fight." "Then we fight harder," Richard said, his voice steel despite his frailty. "Get this to the authorities. I want her in cuffs by nightfall." Monique left the study, her legs heavy, the corridor's shadows darker now. She passed Clara, who whispered to another maid, "She's tearing this house apart." The words stung, but Monique's resolve burned brighter. She slipped into the kitchen, the faint hum of R&B from the staff quarters a fleeting comfort. She checked the trash again, hoping for a trace of the vial, but found nothing. Her fingers brushed the locket, its weight grounding her. Brooklyn was cornered, but a cornered snake was deadly, and Vincent's shadow loomed large. She paused by the pantry, her breath catching as a memory flashed. Brooklyn's smile in the kitchen, cold and triumphant. Then a faint scrape sounded behind her. She spun, her heart pounding, but the kitchen was empty. The only sound the radio's soulful tune. Was it Vincent? A staff member loyal to Brooklyn? Monique's fear surged, but she pushed it down, whispering to herself, "I won't break." She'd unmasked a killer, but the fight was far from over. Brooklyn's venom was spreading, and Monique was its target. Richard, alone in the study, stared at the folder, his heart a battlefield. He'd loved Brooklyn, believed in her, and now every memory was poison. He thought of Monique, her courage, her sacrifice. She'd risked everything for him, a man who'd barely seen her until now. Guilt and gratitude warred within him. But one thing was clear. He wouldn't let her stand alone. He whispered to the empty room, "No more blindness." The truth was out, and he'd fight for it, no matter how much it hurt. Monique stepped into the corridor, her locket a steady pulse against her fear. The estate was no longer a home. It was a war zone, and she was its guardian. Brooklyn's accomplice was out there, and the shadows were closing in. But Monique wouldn't falter. She'd made a promise, and she'd keep it, even if it cost her everything. The scrape in the kitchen still lingered in Monique Jackson's ears, a ghostly echo that made her clutch her locket tighter as she stood in the Thompson Estate's dimly lit corridor. The confirmation of arsenic in Richard Thompson's soup had turned her accusation into a blazing truth, but Brooklyn's parting scream, "This isn't over, Monique," hung like a noose around her heart. The estate's marble floors and gilded walls felt like a prison now, each shadow hiding a threat. The grandfather clock's ticking pulsed through the silence, a reminder that Brooklyn's venom was far from spent. Monique's chest ached with fear and resolve. She'd saved Richard, but the cost was a growing tide of isolation, the staff's whispers branding her a traitor. Her locket, a promise to Richard's first wife, was her only anchor in the storm. She moved toward the staff quarters, her steps soft but heavy with dread. The faint hum of R&B from a radio offered a fleeting taste of Atlanta's soul, but it couldn't drown out the memory of Brooklyn's panicked eyes or the investigator's chilling words. Vincent Cole, her accomplice, plotting to steal Richard's empire. Monique had unmasked a killer, but the weight of that truth pressed harder than ever. Clara's cold whispers, "She's tearing this house apart," stung like salt in a wound. Monique was no longer invisible. She was a target, and the missing vial from the kitchen trash was proof someone was watching, waiting. In the study, Richard sat slumped in his leather chair, the folder of bank transfers and phone records spread before him like a map of betrayal. The firelight cast shadows on his gaunt face, each line etched deeper by the arsenic's slow ravage. His hands trembled, not from poison now, but from the pain of Brooklyn's treachery. He'd loved her, built a life with her, and every memory was now tainted. Her laugh, her touch, all lies. The investigator's words echoed. Millions moved offshore. Calls to Vincent Cole, a man Richard had once dismissed as a charming opportunist. He thought of Monique, her fierce eyes cutting through his blindness, and guilt clawed at him. He doubted her, let Brooklyn's charm veil the truth, and it nearly cost him his life. He stood, his legs unsteady, and paced to the window, Atlanta's skyline a distant reminder of the empire he'd fought for. "I let her in," he whispered, his voice raw with self-loathing. "I let her poison me." The bourbon glass on his desk gleamed, untouched, a symbol of his refusal to drown his pain. He thought of his first wife, her gentle smile, her trust in Monique. He'd failed her memory, and now Monique bore the burden of his salvation. His heart ached with gratitude and shame. She'd risked everything, and he'd repaid her with doubt. Monique slipped into the study, her apron crisp despite the chaos, her eyes wary but resolute. Richard turned, his face a storm of anguish. "She's gone," he said, his voice breaking. "The police took her. They found the vial in her purse. Arsenic, just like the soup." Monique's breath caught, relief flooding her, but it was tinged with dread. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of his pain. "I know you loved her." Richard sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face. "Loved," he said, the word bitter. "I thought I knew her. I thought she was my second chance. But she was planning with him, Vincent Cole. They wanted my money, my life." His voice cracked, tears glistening in his eyes. "You saw it when I didn't, Monique. You saved me." Monique's heart twisted, her own fear mingling with his sorrow. I had to, sir, she said, her voice steady despite the ache. I promised your first wife I'd keep you safe. I couldn't let her down. Or you. Richard looked up, his eyes searching hers. You risked everything, he said, his voice low, raw. The staff, they're against you now. I heard Clara whispering, calling you a troublemaker. Why didn't you walk away? Monique's fingers brushed her locket, its weight grounding her. Because silence would have killed you, she said, her eyes fierce. I've been invisible here for 5 years, but I see everything. Her calls, her lies, the way she moved money. I couldn't stay quiet, not when I knew. A sharp knock broke the moment. Marcus entered, his face grim, followed by a police officer, his badge glinting in the firelight. Mr. Thompson, the officer said, his voice steady. Brooklyn's in custody, and Vincent Cole was arrested an hour ago at his penthouse. He confessed, said he gave her the arsenic, promised her your fortune. We've got enough to charge them both. Richard's shoulders sagged, the weight of betrayal crushing him. She looked me in the eye every day, he said, his voice barely audible. She smiled while she killed me. Monique's stomach nodded, her fear flaring anew. She's not done, sir, she said, her voice urgent. She screamed at me when they took her. This isn't over. She's got people here, in this house. That vial was gone from the trash. Someone took it. The officer nodded, his face serious. We're searching her belongings, tracking her contacts. But you're right, she's dangerous, even behind bars. Stay vigilant, Ms. Jackson. Richard's eyes met Monique's, a flicker of trust cutting through his pain. You've got my back, he said, his voice soft but firm. I won't forget that. Monique nodded, her throat tight. And I've got yours, sir, she said, her resolve burning despite the fear. She left the study, the corridor's shadows darker now, the R&B tune from the staff quarters a faint comfort. Clara passed her, her eyes cold, whispering to another maid, She's ruined us all. The words cut, but Monique's heart burned with purpose. She'd unmasked Brooklyn, but the estate was a battlefield, and the whispers were weapons. She slipped into the kitchen, her hands trembling as she checked the pantry. The scrape she'd heard earlier echoed in her mind, a warning that Brooklyn's reach extended beyond bars. Her fingers brushed her locket, its promise a steady pulse against her fear. She thought of Richard, his broken voice, his glistening eyes. He was alive because of her, but the cost was steep. Her name, her place in the house, her safety. The staff's glares followed her, their whispers a constant hum. But Monique wouldn't break. She'd faced a killer and won, and she'd face whatever came next. Richard, alone in the study, stared at the fire, his heart a wreckage of betrayal and gratitude. He thought of Monique, her courage, her sacrifice. She'd seen what he couldn't, and he owed her his life. He whispered to the empty room, no more lies. The estate was his again, but it was fractured, and he'd need Monique to hold it together. The fight wasn't over. Brooklyn's scream promised that. But for the first time, he felt he wasn't alone. Monique stood by the kitchen window, Atlanta's skyline glowing in the distance. The locket warmed her skin, a reminder of her vow. She'd saved Richard, but the shadows were still moving, and she'd be ready when they struck. The echo of Brooklyn's scream, "This isn't over, Monique," clung to Monique Jackson like a shadow as she stood by the kitchen window, Atlanta's skyline a faint glow against the darkening evening. The Thompson Estate's grandeur felt suffocating now, its marble halls and crystal chandeliers, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. The police had taken Brooklyn, the arsenic vial found in her purse, sealing her fate, but the victory was hollow. Monique's locket, etched with the initials of Richard's first wife, pressed against her chest, its weight a reminder of her vow to protect him. Yet the staff's whispers, Clara's cold accusation, "She's ruined us all," cut deeper than any blade. Monique's courage had saved Richard, but it had painted a target on her back, and the fear of unseen enemies gnawed at her. She was no longer just a maid, she was a threat, and the estate was a battlefield. Monique's hands trembled as she polished a silver tray, her reflection distorted in its gleam. The faint hum of R&B from the staff quarters offered a fleeting comfort, a reminder of Atlanta's pulse, but it couldn't drown out the memory of Clara's venom or the scrape she'd heard in the kitchen. Someone was watching, perhaps loyal to Brooklyn or her accomplice, Vincent Cole. The police officer's warning, "She's dangerous, even behind bars," rang in her ears, a constant reminder that the fight was far from over. Her heart ached with a mix of pride and dread. She'd unmasked a killer, but the cost was isolation, her name now a lightning rod for suspicion. In the library, Richard Thompson sat by the fire, its light casting shadows on his gaunt face. The folder of bank transfers and phone records lay closed on the table, a grim testament to Brooklyn's betrayal. His hands, still trembling from the arsenic's lingering effects, gripped the arms of his chair. The pain of her treachery was a wound that bled anew with every thought. Her smile, her lies, the love he'd believed in. He thought of Monique, her fierce eyes cutting through his blindness, and gratitude warred with guilt. He'd doubted her, let Brooklyn's charm cloud his judgment, and now Monique stood alone against a house that turned on her. His heart twisted. He'd built an empire in Atlanta, but he'd nearly lost it to a woman he loved. He stood, his cane tapping softly, and paced to the window, the city's lights a distant reminder of his strength. "I was a fool," he whispered, his voice raw with self-reproach. "She played me, and Monique paid the price." The memory of his first wife, her trust in Monique, haunted him. He'd failed her memory, but Monique hadn't. She'd risked everything, and he owed her more than he could repay. Monique knocked softly and entered, her apron crisp, her eyes wary but resolute. Richard turned, his face softening. "You're still here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything, the whispers, the glares, why?" Monique's fingers brushed her locket, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Because I made a promise, sir," she said, her eyes glistening. "Your first wife was my friend. She loved you, and I swore I'd keep you safe. I can't walk away, no matter what they say." Richard's throat tightened, his eyes glistening. "They're saying plenty," he said, his voice low. "Clara, the others, they call you a troublemaker. They think you've torn this house apart." Monique's heart stung, but she held his gaze. "Let them talk," she said, her voice fierce. "I didn't do this for their approval. I did it for you. Brooklyn was killing you, sir, and I'd do it again, even if it makes me the villain." Richard stepped closer, his cane steadying him. "You're no villain," he said, his voice firm. "You're the only one who saw the truth, and I'm making it official. You're the steward of this estate now. You'll run this house, Monique. No one deserves it more." Monique's breath caught, her eyes widening. "Sir, I didn't—" she started, but Richard raised a hand, silencing her. "You've earned it," he said, his voice breaking. "I was blind, Monique. I doubted you because of who you are. A maid, someone I barely saw. That was my shame. This house needs truth, not wealth, and you're its heart." Monique's chest tightened, pride warring with fear. "They'll hate me more," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Clara, the others, they already whisper. This'll make it worse." "Then let them whisper," Richard said, his eyes fierce. "This is my house, and you're my choice. Anyone who can't accept that can leave." A sharp clatter broke the moment. Monique turned to see Clara in the doorway, a silver tray crashing to the floor, her eyes blazing with resentment. "So this is it?" Clara spat, her voice sharp. "You elevate her over us? She's tearing this house apart, and you reward her?" Monique's heart pounded, but she stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. "I'm keeping this house standing, Clara. I saved Mr. Thompson when you all looked away. If that's trouble, then I'll bear it." Clara's face twisted, but she stormed out, her whispers trailing like poison. Richard looked at Monique, his eyes heavy with gratitude. "You don't deserve this," he said, his voice soft. "But I need you, Monique. This house needs you." Monique nodded, her throat tight. "I'm here, sir," she said, her resolve burning despite the ache. She left the library, the fire's glow fading behind her. In the corridor, the shadows felt alive, Clara's words a fresh wound. She slipped into the staff kitchen where the R&B tune played softly, a reminder of Atlanta's heartbeat. But as she reached for a glass, a folded note slipped from her apron, its handwriting sharp. Truth bends, Monique. You're not safe. Her breath caught, fear surging. She burned the note in the sink, the flames licking the paper, her face illuminated with defiance. She stood by the window, Atlanta's skyline glittering in the distance. The locket warmed her skin, its promise a steady pulse. Clara's resentment, the note's threat, Brooklyn's reach was long, even from a cell. Monique's heart raced, but she whispered to herself, I won't break. She'd taken on the role of steward, but it was a crown of thorns, and the estate was a battleground. Richard, alone in the library, stared into the fire, his heart a tangle of gratitude and guilt. Monique had saved him, but at what cost? He thought of the note, the whispers, the shadows still lurking. He'd made her a steward, but he'd also made her a target. I won't let her fall, he whispered, his voice firm. The estate was his to reclaim, and he'd do it with Monique at his side, no matter the cost. Monique stepped into the corridor, her locket a beacon against the darkness. The house was fractured, but she'd hold it together. Brooklyn's venom lingered, but Monique's truth was stronger. She'd fight for Richard, for her promise, for herself. The flames that consumed the threatening note. Truth bends, Monique. You're not safe. Still flickered in Monique Jackson's mind as she stood in the Thompson Estate's corridor, the weight of her new role as steward pressing like a stone on her chest. The library's firelight had illuminated her defiance, but now in the dim hallway, fear clawed at her. Clara's venomous outburst and the staff's cold glares had turned the mansion into a labyrinth of distrust. Her locket, etched with the initials of Richard Thompson's first wife, was a steady pulse against her heart, its promise to protect him now a vow that threatened to break her. Brooklyn's scream, "This isn't over," echoed from her cell, a reminder that danger lingered, even behind bars. Monique's courage had made her a hero, but it had also made her a target, and the shadows seemed to whisper her name. She moved toward the staff kitchen, her steps heavy, the faint hum of R&B from a radio offering a sliver of Atlanta's warmth. The note's words burned in her memory, a warning that Brooklyn's reach extended beyond prison walls. Clara's accusation, "She's tearing this house apart," cut deeper than Monique admitted, each whisper a reminder of her isolation. She'd saved Richard from arsenic's slow death, but the cost was steep. Her name was now a lightning rod, drawing resentment from those who saw her as an upstart maid. Her heart ached with a mix of pride and dread. She'd taken on the mantle of steward, but it felt like a crown of thorns, and every step in the estate was a battle against unseen enemies. In the study, Richard sat by the fire, its glow casting jagged shadows on his gaunt face. His cane rested against the chair, a reminder of the arsenic's lingering toll. The folder of bank transfers and phone records was gone, replaced by a photograph of his first wife, her gentle smile a haunting contrast to Brooklyn's betrayal. His heart was a wreckage of guilt and gratitude. Guilt for doubting Monique, gratitude for her courage. He'd loved Brooklyn, believed in her, and every memory was now poison, tainted by her lies and Vincent Cole's scheming. He thought of Monique, her fierce eyes cutting through his blindness, and his chest tightened. She'd risked everything, and now the staff turned on her, their whispers a betrayal of their own. He'd made her a steward, but he'd also made her a pariah, and the weight of that choice crushed him. He stood, his cane tapping softly, and moved to the window. Atlanta's skyline, a distant promise of the strength he'd once had. "I failed you," he whispered to the photograph, his voice raw. But Monique didn't. He thought of her locket, her vow, and his heart burned with resolve. He wouldn't let her face this alone. Monique slipped into the study, her apron crisp, her eyes wary but resolute. Richard turned, his face softening. "You're still standing," he said, his voice thick with admiration. "After Clara, the whispers, I thought you might break." Monique's fingers brushed her locket, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I don't break, sir," she said, her eyes glistening. "But it's heavy. The staff hate me. Clara's leading the charge. And that note—" Her voice faltered, the memory of its words a fresh wound. "Brooklyn's still out there pulling strings. I'm not safe, and neither are you. Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes fierce. You're not alone, he said, his voice firm. I owe you my life, Monique. I won't let them tear you down. Before she could respond, a sharp knock broke the silence. Marcus entered, his face pale. Sir, the police called. Brooklyn tried to bribe a witness, a maid, Lila, from her cell. Lila refused and told them everything. Brooklyn's desperate, saying you framed her, Monique. Monique's heart raced, fear surging like a tide. Lila, she said, her voice trembling. She's been quiet, always watching. If Brooklyn got to her... She trailed off, the note's warning echoing. You're not safe. Richard's eyes darkened. She's cornered, lashing out, he said, his voice low. But we've got the evidence. Arsenic, calls, transfers. The police are building the case. Monique nodded, her throat tight. She's not done, sir, she said, her voice urgent. That note, it came from inside this house. Someone's helping her. That night, Monique moved through the kitchen, her senses on edge. The R&B tune had faded, leaving only the grandfather clocks ticking, each chime a pulse in the silence. She checked the pantry, her fingers trembling as she opened the door. Her breath caught, a small vial, identical to Brooklyn's, sat on a shelf filled with white powder. Her heart pounded. Was it arsenic or something else? She reached for it, but a faint scent hit her, sharp and chemical. Her vision blurred, her legs buckled, and she collapsed, the vial slipping from her hand. A scrap of paper fluttered to the floor, its words scrawled in sharp ink. You can't win forever. Monique woke minutes later, her head throbbing, her mouth dry. The vial was gone, the paper still clutched in her hand. Panic surged. She'd been drugged, a mild sedative, not arsenic, but the message was clear. Brooklyn's allies were close, watching. Her heart hammered, fear warring with defiance. She stumbled to her feet, the locket grounding her. I won't let you win, she whispered, her voice fierce despite the tremble. She slipped into the corridor, the shadows darker now, the portrait's eyes sharper. Clara passed, her gaze cold, but Monique held her head high. You're playing a dangerous game, Clara hissed, her voice low. This house doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the truth, Monique shot back, her voice cutting through the silence. And I'll fight for it, no matter what you think. Clara stormed off, her whispers trailing like venom. Monique's heart ached. The weight of her role as steward crushed her. She thought of Richard, his broken voice, his trust in her. She'd saved him, but the estate was fracturing, and she was its only glue. The note, the vial, the drugged collapse. They were warnings, and she'd heed them. Brooklyn's reach was long, but Monique's resolve was longer. Richard, alone in the study, stared at his first wife's photograph, his heart a tangle of guilt and resolve. Monique had faced a house of enemies for him, and he'd let her bear the burden alone. He whispered to the empty room, I'll stand with you. The fire crackled, its light a promise of the fight ahead. He'd lost one love to death, another to betrayal, but he wouldn't lose Monique to the shadows. Monique stood by the kitchen window, Atlanta's skyline glittering in the distance. Her locket warmed her skin, its promise a beacon against her fear. She'd been drugged and threatened, but she wouldn't break. The truth was her weapon, and she'd wield it, no matter how many shadows closed in. The scrap of paper, you can't win forever, still burned in Monique Jackson's mind as she stood in the Thompson Estate's kitchen, her fingers clutching the locket that tethered her to her vow. The drug collapse in the pantry, the faint chemical scent, and Brooklyn's lingering scream. This isn't over, wove a net of fear around her heart. The estate's marble halls and gilded frames felt like a battlefield now, each shadow whispering of unseen enemies. Clara's venomous words and the staff's cold glares had carved Monique's role as steward into a crown of thorns, her courage a beacon that drew both admiration and resentment. Her chest ached with pride and dread. She'd saved Richard from arsenic's slow death, but the note and the vanished vial were warnings that Brooklyn's venom still pulsed through the mansion. The grandfather clock's ticking echoed, a relentless reminder that time was a fragile ally. Monique moved through the kitchen, her steps deliberate, her eyes scanning for threats. The faint hum of R&B from the staff quarters offered a fleeting taste of Atlanta's soul, but it couldn't soothe the storm within her. The memory of her collapse, vision blurring, legs buckling, clawed at her. A reminder that Brooklyn's allies were close, perhaps among the staff. Clara's accusation, "This house doesn't belong to you," stung like a fresh wound. But Monique's heart burned with defiance. She'd unmasked a killer, taken on the mantle of steward, and faced a house that turned against her. Her locket, etched with the initials of Richard's first wife, was her anchor, its promise to protect him now, a vow that defined her. She'd fight, no matter the cost. In the library, Richard Thompson sat by the fire, its glow casting shadows on his gaunt face. His cane rested against the chair, a relic of the arsenic's toll, but his eyes held a new fire, resolve born of gratitude and guilt. The photograph of his first wife lay on the table, her smile a haunting reminder of the love he'd lost and the betrayal he'd survived. Brooklyn's treachery had shattered him. Her calls to Vincent Cole and secret bank transfers were like a knife in his heart. But Monique's courage, her fierce eyes, her steady voice, had saved him, and the weight of that debt crushed him. He'd doubted her, let his blindness to Brooklyn's charm endanger them both, and now Monique faced a house of enemies alone. His heart ached with the need to make it right. He stood, his cane tapping softly, and moved to the window, Atlanta's skyline glittering like a promise he'd reclaim. "I won't fail you again," he whispered to the photograph, his voice raw. "Not you, not Monique." He thought of her locket, her vow, and his resolve hardened. She'd stood against a storm for him, and he'd stand with her now. Monique knocked softly and entered, her apron crisp, her eyes wary but fierce. Richard turned, his face softening. "You're still here," he said, his voice thick with admiration. "After the note, the collapse, I thought you might run." Monique's fingers brushed her locket, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Running's not in me, sir," she said, her eyes glistening. "I promised your first wife I'd keep you safe. That note, that drug, they're Brooklyn's way of fighting back. But I'm not backing down." Richard's throat tightened, his eyes searching hers. "You're caring too much," he said, his voice breaking. "Clara, the staff, they're tearing you apart. I made you a steward, but I've made you a target." Monique's heart stung, but she held his gaze. "I chose this, sir," she said, her voice fierce. "They can whisper, glare, hate me. I didn't save you for their approval. I saved you because it was right." Richard stepped closer, his cane steadying him. "You're the heart of this house," he said, his voice firm. "I was blind, Monique. I doubted you, and I'm ashamed. But I'm with you now. We'll face this together." A sharp clatter broke the moment. Monique turned to see a maid, Lila, in the doorway, her eyes wide with guilt. I didn't mean to," Lila stammered, a tray of glasses trembling in her hands. "I heard about the note, Monique. I didn't send it, I swear." Monique's heart raced, suspicion flaring. "Then who did?" she asked, her voice sharp but steady. "Someone in this house is working for Brooklyn. That vial, the drug, it's not a game." Lila's eyes darted away, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, but I refused her. She called me from jail, offering money to lie. I told the police." Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes fierce. "Brooklyn's still pulling strings," he said, his voice low. "We'll find her allies, Monique. I've got the police watching the staff." Monique nodded, her throat tight. "They're close, sir," she said, her voice urgent. "That note, that drug, it came from inside. I can feel it." That evening, Monique organized a charity event in the dining hall, a benefit for Atlanta women escaping domestic violence. The chandeliers glowed, the tables gleamed, but the staff's glares followed her. Clara whispered to a footman, "She's no steward, she's a troublemaker." Monique's heart ached, but she moved with purpose, her locket glinting as she greeted guests. The event was her first act as steward, a declaration that the estate stood for more than wealth. Yet the note's words haunted her, and Lila's guilt lingered like a shadow. Under the magnolia tree in the garden, Richard joined her, his cane tapping softly. "You're changing this house," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I doubted you once, Monique. Never again." Monique's eyes glistened, her voice steady. "It's not just me, sir," she said. It's the truth, and I'll guard it, no matter who's watching. A sudden silence fell, broken by a phone vibrating in Monique's apron. She pulled it out, her heart pounding, an unknown number, a heavy breath, then a click. Her breath caught, fear surging. She looked to the shadows where a figure moved. A staff member, holding something small, glinting like a vial. The figure vanished, but the threat lingered. Monique clutched her locket, her resolve burning. "They're still here," she whispered, her voice fierce. "But I'm not afraid." She'd saved Richard, claimed the estate's heart, but Brooklyn's venom pulsed on. The fight wasn't over, and Monique would face it, her truth a shield against the darkness. Richard watched her, his heart heavy with gratitude. "We'll face it together," he said, his voice firm. The firelight flickered, Atlanta's skyline glowing beyond. The estate was fractured, but Monique was its guardian, and he'd stand by her, no matter the cost. As the shadows of the Thompson estate fade, Monique's courage and Richard's redemption linger as a testament to the power of truth against betrayal. What did you feel as Monique faced Brooklyn's venom? Did Richard's journey resonate with you? Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear how this story stirred your heart. Thank you for joining us in this gripping tale of loyalty and deception. Stay tuned for more stories that challenge silence and champion justice. Until we meet again, keep seeking the truth.